After the death of their parents, they gave their adopted sister the ruined mansion. What Elaine found inside changed everything. When the will was read, William and Charlotte split the fortune, leaving Elaine with nothing but a crumbling estate they hadn't set foot in for years. The laughter in that lawyer's office still echoed in her head as she walked away with the rusted keys. But behind the rotting walls and dust-choked halls, Elaine uncovered something no one in the family knew existed, something worth more than everything her siblings had taken. Years later, when their wealth vanished in desperation brought them to her restored mansion, the balance of power had shifted forever, and Elaine held the terms of their survival in her hands. Before we go any further, if this is your first time watching one of our videos, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Stick with us till the very end. And if this story moves you, drop your thoughts in the comments and share it with a friend. Now, let's begin. The air inside Whitmore and Langston Law felt colder than the February wind outside, the kind of cold that sank into your bones. Not because of temperature, but because of the way people looked at you. The Lehman Rose sat in a high-backed leather chair on the far end of the polished mahogany table. She didn't lean back. She didn't cross her legs. Her hands stayed folded neatly in her lap, as if she was still that quiet little girl who'd been told to sit still and look grateful. Across from her, William and Charlotte, her adoptive siblings, spoke in hushed voices, not about their parents, not about grief, about stocks, about which art pieces from the New York Pent House would look better in their own apartments. Their tones were sharp, rehearsed, already dividing up the life their parents had left behind. A few other people were in the room, family friends and aunt, the family's old financial advisor. They sat along the edges, whispering occasionally, "She's here for the charity cut." One voice murmured, just loud enough to float across the room, "Always was the outsider." Another replied. Ella kept her gaze fixed on the table, breathing slow. If she looked up now, they'd see the hurt, and she learned long ago that in this family showing hurt was giving away power. Lawyer cleared his throat, the rustle of papers as per the wishes of the late Mr. and Mrs. Monroe. His voice was flat, professional, stripped of any warmth. William got the penthouse in Manhattan. Charlotte, the vineyard in Napa Valley, the remaining liquid assets, cash, bonds, stocks, split evenly between the two, and then the pause, the kind that made every eye in the room glance toward Elaine. To Elaine Monroe, the family estate in Vermont, the estate that was a generous word for it. Elaine knew the place, a sprawling mansion her parents had abandoned years ago when upkeep became more expensive than its charm, a roof sagging under years of neglect, windows shattered by storms, gardens swallowed by weeds. The last time she'd seen it, the grand double doors were sealed shut with rusted chains. William's lips curved into a smirk. "Guess you won't be homeless, huh?" he said under his breath, loud enough for a ripple of quiet laughter to travel through the room. Charlotte didn't bother hiding her amusement. "Maybe you could open it as a haunted house. You know, make it useful." A few of the bystanders exchanged knowing glances. One woman near the back muttered, "Just giving her something to keep her busy." Another replied, "Better than nothing, I suppose." Elaine sat perfectly still, letting the sting pass through her without anchoring it in her chest. She simply reached forward when the lawyer slid the old iron keys toward her. Cold, heavy, the kind of keys that belonged to a place that hadn't been opened in years. No speech, no thanks. She slipped them into her bag and stood. As she walked toward the door, the murmur behind her swelled again. Not one person called after her. Outside, the winter air bited her cheeks. The city hummed as if nothing monumental had happened. She wrapped her coat tighter and headed toward the train station. She didn't go back to the apartment. She was renting in Queens. She bought a one-way ticket north, past the cities, past the suburbs, past the places where the Monroe name still meant something. By the time the train slowed into the small Vermont station, snow had begun to fall. Not the pretty kind that flutters, but the wet, heavy kind that soaks into your gloves and makes the roads dangerous. A rusted pickup truck she'd hired idled outside, the driver leaning against the hood, watching her with the polite curiosity small towns give strangers. The drive to the estate was long and winding, the trees closing and tighter the further they went. The road turned to gravel, then dirt, and then just as the sky darkened until late afternoon, the mansion appeared. It loomed at the end of the overgrown driveway, its once white facade streaked with black from years of storms. The tall front windows were nothing but gaping holes, some boarded over, others open to the cold. The gardens, once the pride of the Monroe matriarch, were a tangle of thorny branches and dead leaves. The driver whistled low. Been a while since anyone cared for this place. Elaine didn't answer. She just stepped out into the cold, boots crunching over ice and gravel, and stood there a long moment. In silence, she could almost hear the voices of her siblings, still laughing. She tightened her scarf, climbed the cracked stone steps, and slid the key into the lock. It turned with a groan. The front doors eased inward, inch by inch, like lungs that had forgotten how to breathe. Dust hung in the entryway, a slow-moving ocean under a shaft of pale winter light. Elaine didn't step fully inside. At first, she stood on the threshold, fingers curled around the key like a talisman, letting her eyes adjust to the gloom. The foyer had once been grand, 2 curling staircases, a chandelier the size of a small car, but time had gnawed at everything. The chandelier sagged by a single chain, crystals furred with grime. A draught leaked through the boards, slipping around her ankles the way a cat wins. Through legs, somewhere deeper, a shutter tapped, tap, tap. Patient and repetitive, she took one step, then another. Her boots whispered over grit. With each movement, tiny eddies of dust rose and settled, quiet as held breath. She slid her palm along the banister, sticky, splintered, then wiped her hand on her coat with a grim little smile. "Welcome home, huh?" She made a slow circuit of ground floor. The dining room was a cathedral of cobwebs. The conservatory's glass had caved long ago. Vines had trespassed and then died, leaving a lace-work of brown stems. In the kitchen, a pot still sat on a cold stove, fossilized grease catching the light like amber. She cracked a window, coughed, then cracked her more. Fresh air crept in reluctantly. She picked a small room behind the kitchen as a base, 4 walls, 1 window that mostly closed. She rolled up a thin mattress, shook out a blanket, and set her bag down like a flag. The heater she brought groaned to life, throwing off a thin halo of warmth that lost the fight with the room. But she set her hands near it anyway, turning them toasting side, then back. Little rituals, little victories. Work came in increments. A broom first, a bucket, a foldable lamp she clipped to a door frame and adjusted until the beam knifed through the murk. She swept until her shoulders itched, then swept some more. Her movements became metronome, steady, push, gather, lift, dump. When the bucket filled, she carried it out to the back steps, shoulders squared against the wind, and tipped the gray soup into the frozen earth. Steam rose and lazy ribbons. She watched it fade like a thought. She chose not to think. 2 days in, she walked to the village hardware store. The bell over the door chimed, a cheerful sound that didn't match the way conversations paused. It was subtle, not cruel, curiosity wearing a sweater. She picked out tarps, respirator, gloves, a pride bar, a headlamp. She moved down the aisles with the loose economy of someone counting cash in her head. At the register, the clerk glanced up, then down, then up again. "You the one up at the old Monroe place?" "Yeah," she said, easy. "Roof's mean." He slid the items across the scanner. "Basement floods when the thaw hits." "Just saying. Appreciate it." She stacked supplies with neat hands. "I'll take a wet vac, too." By the paint section, 2 women compared swatches and whispered, "Is she staying there alone?" "Looks like it. That place chews people up." On the sidewalk, a pair of teens in puffy jackets shuffled by. "Yo, that's the city lady." One said, not quietly, "Why bother fixing a haunted museum?" The other answered, softer, almost sympathetic. Still kind of brave, Elaine kept walking, no heat in her chest. Just a steady, practical hum. Do this, then that, then rest. Back at the mansion, she tackled the library, even ruined. It had presents floor-to-ceiling shelves, a rolling ladder frozen mid-climb, leather spines cracked like old knuckles. She opened the tall casement windows an inch, and let the cold bite the room clean. Paper smell, varnish, a faint ghost of pipe smoke that must have seeped into the wood and refused to leave. She sorted in silence. Keep, donate, trash. The keep pile grew slowest, selective as a heartbeat when she lifted heavier tones. Her breath roughened, fogging the beam of her headlamp. She switched hands, flexed fingers, rotated wrists, micro-movements. Small resets, the craft of staying with hard things. Evenings were for repairs that didn't require ladders. She scraped the paint in the small room until curls fell like snow. She patched holes with compound, sanded, then ran her palm over the wall and nodded, not pleased, just aligned. Dinner was simple. Soup warmed on a camp stove, bread and apple. She ate sitting on a crate, slow and present, listening to the house make its old animal noises. Tap, settle, sigh. On the third morning, the plumber arrived, boots thumping a steady rhythm down the hall. He surveyed the basement with the expression of a man looking at a difficult crossword. These pipes, he murmured, kneeling, they're a history lesson. He talked shop. She listened, asked for parts lists, dates, costs. When he left, she stood alone at the top of the basement steps, staring down at the dark. Cold climbed from below like a thought. She exhaled long, then turned away. Not today. Midweek, a bitter wind front moved through. The mansion creaked and tightened, complaining in low tones. She wrapped her scarf and took to the upstairs hallway, checking for leaks, laying towels under suspects' ills, naming rooms, allowed to claim them. East bedroom, corner suite, nursery with the faded blue border. Names organized the scale of the task. Names made it hers. She returned to the library in the late afternoon. That hour when light thins and edges go soft, she pulled the rolling ladder, the wheels churning, and climbed to the third shelf. Her gloved fingers chose a thick atlas. It resisted, then gave with a papery sigh. Behind it, the backboard looked just slightly off, not crooked, shifted, as if the wood had separated from the wall by the width of a fingernail. She frowned, set the atlas on her thigh, and tapped the panel knuckle to wood. Once, twice. The sound wasn't the dull thud she expected. It had a faint hollow core, like tapping a drum whose skin had been pulled too tight. She leaned closer. The grain at the edge didn't match the adjacent planks. A seam, hair-thin, ran vertically. Not a revelation, not a rush, just a soft tilt in her attention. She climbed down slow, knees careful on each room. On the floor, she set the atlas with the keep pile, then crouched by the ladder's wheels and rolled it flush against the shelf to anchor her reach. She took off one glove, pressed her fingertips to the seam, and followed it from waist height to shoulder. Her skin-registered temperature changes the way a tongue senses a chipped tooth. Here, warmer, the air cool. She split her fingers and pushed gently. Nothing. She tried the lower edge, thumb to the baseboard. Nothing. She tried the upper right corner. A careful inward pressure. A whisper of movement so slight she felt it more than saw it. She paused, hand still, scanned the surrounding wood for a catch. A peg, a habit. Old houses teach you to listen in more than one direction. Through ears, through skin, through patience. She stood, rolled her shoulders, and took a breath that filled the bottom of her lungs. Not now, she thought. Not hungry, not tired, not rushing. She marked the seam with a pencil dot, then stepped back to sweep another hour, choosing to let the question breathe. By twilight, snow started again, soft and dry this time, the kind that hissed against the window screens. She laid her tools in a tidy line on a towel, gloves, scraper, flashlight, a small flathead screwdriver she might use as a probe. She clicked off the clamp light. The library went dusky. shelves becoming silhouettes stacked with dark loaves. She walked the perimeter once more slow. At the far corner a draft slid out from behind a bookcase like a secret. She held her hand there, palm open, felt the faintest ribbon of colder air thread past her skin. Her mouth quirked, almost a smile. Okay. The next morning she returned to the hardware store for a stud finder and a proper pry tool. The bell chimed, same clerk, same pause. "You're making a project of it," he said, bagging the tools bit by bit. She tucked a stray braid behind her ear, the gesture small and precise. "What's the chance the walls hide surprises?" He shrugged, friendly, but non-committal. "Old places keep stories. Sometimes they keep squirrels." Outside, the women from yesterday were back, coffee steaming, gossip floating on breath-white air. "She looks tired," one said. "She looks focused," the other replied, as if the two were not contradictions. Back at the mansion, she ate standing up. Quick sandwich and a handful of almonds, then drew a small sketch of the shelf on a notepad. Measurements, same location, notes about the sound. She wasn't chasing adrenaline. She was building a map. She set the stud finder against the panel. The device summed softly, light skipping in a pattern that didn't behave like the others. She slid it horizontally, vertically, then diagonally, tilting her head the way you do when a track you know plays a half-step different. She jotted the odd readings, then slid the flathead into the tiniest gap at the base and applied feather pressure just enough to test flex. She stopped, pulled back. Not today, she told herself again, but the words felt different now. Not avoidance, but timing. She reshelved the atlas, moved a row of novels to distribute weight, and felt the shelf accept the load with a small, satisfied settle. Evening found her outside, breath puffing as she salted the steps. The sky cleared to a hard blue-black stars sharp enough to nick a finger. She leaned on the rail, looked over the grounds, and pictured lines. Paths she'd clear, beds she'd replant, lights she'd string along the drive. Not fantasy. A plan stretched over months like canvas over a frame. From the road, faint voices drifted. 2 walkers, a dog's collar clinking. Places waking up, one said about time, the other answered, took somebody stubborn. Elaine pushed off the rail, rolled her shoulders, and went back in, closing the door with a firmness that sounded like a promise. Inside, the house exhaled. She set her alarm for early. Tomorrow would be a library day, not for a grand reveal, for careful work, steady hands, and the quiet discovery of what the wood was willing to say when asked the right way. The next morning broke in layers of silver fog, the kind that blurs the line between sky and ground. Elaine woke before her alarm, the kind of waking that isn't startled. It's steady, as if the day had been waiting for her. She dressed in her warmest layers, pulling on fingerless gloves so her hands could feel textures without freezing, and walked straight to the library. The air in there had a faint crispness now, a result of days of cracked windows and constant sweeping. She set the lamp at a low angle so shadows revealed more than light, then pulled the rolling ladder to the seam she'd marked with a pencil. Her tools were lined up on a drop cloth, each one within a hand's reach. She started with the flathead, slipping it into the gap at the base, gentle like testing the teeth of a key in an unfamiliar lock. A whisper of wood fibers gave way. She moved the tool higher, pressing where the stud finder had hinted at empty space. This time the panel shifted with a soft sigh. Barely an inch, but enough. She paused, breath in, breath out, not a rush. Now sudden pull. She pressed her palm against the panel and eased it. Sideways, it moved like something that hadn't been touched in decades, stubborn but yielding until the edge revealed darkness. A hollow space stretched behind the wall, tall enough for her to step into. The smell hit first, not rot, but a dry metallic scent like coins kept too long in a drawer. She switched on her headlamp and ducked inside. Her boots met stone, smooth and cold. The narrow corridor ended in a steel door, the kind with a dial combination lock that belonged in an old bank. The handle was tarnished but intact, its weight pulling her hand downward when she touched it. She let go, the metal's chill lingering in her fingers. Elaine didn't have the code, but she had patience. She snapped photos of the lock, the hinges, the weld lines. Then she called a locksmith. Not the kind you find in a phone book, but the kind who answers with, "Who gave you my number?" He came the next afternoon in a dented van, his tools hidden under a blanket. He didn't ask questions, just studied the vault with the appreciation of a craftsman. "This," he said, "is older than both of us combined." It took him 4 hours with breaks to warm his hands and sip coffee in silence. Elaine sat cross-legged near the library door, watching dust drift in the beam of her lamp, listening to the faint clicks and the locksmith's occasional hums of approval. When the final tumblers fell into place, there was no dramatic swing, no echoing clang, just a low creak as the heavy door inched open. Cold air spilled out, followed by the faint smell of aged paper and something sharper, Polish, maybe, or the ghost of cedar. Inside, metal shelves lined the walls, each stacked with shapes wrapped in canvas or sealed in wax paper. She reached for the nearest bundle, unwrapped it, and found thick stacks of cash, the bills crisp despite their age. Another shelf held gold bars stamped with dates from the late 7s, each one heavy enough to make her wrist ache when she lifted it. Bare bonds lay in neat rows, their printed faces declaring values that made her eyes blur. A wooden crate in the corner held uncut gemstones, colors flashing under the lamplight. Ruby, sapphire, emerald, each one cool and solid against her skin. She worked in silence, her mind not leaping ahead to totals or headlines. This was not a jackpot moment. It was a shift in gravity. Every step she took in that vault felt heavier, more deliberate. She was not the same woman who had stood in that lawyer's office weeks ago, keys in hand while her siblings laughed. She inventoried everything over the next several days. Each night she locked a vault and hid the key in a place only she knew. She read quietly at her makeshift desk, running numbers, researching investments, learning how to move wealth without drawing noise. When repairs on the mansion accelerated, the small-town gossip shifted. At the hardware store, the clerk raised an eyebrow at her bulk orders. "She's going big," he told another customer. "She's not wasting time." "That's for sure," the man replied. By summer, scaffolding wrapped the mansion's facade. Fresh paint erased decades of weather, and the gardens began to breathe again. Rows of flowers reintroduced the sunlight. Gravel paths ran into clean lines. Workers came and went, speaking of her in low tones. "Quiet boss, but pays on time. She knows what she wants. No cutting corners." Inside, the library became a showpiece, restored to the deep amber glow of its prime. The vault remained hidden behind the bookcase, its door locked, its contents untouched, except for what she needed to fund the next stage. She didn't sell the estate. She didn't flee to the city with her windfall. She stayed brick by brick until the mansion stood as it once had, tall, graceful, and impossible to ignore at the end of the long drive. That's when her siblings called. The first message came from Charlotte, her voice thin, urgent. "Elaine, we need to talk. It's important." The second, from William, less polite. "Call me. It's serious." They didn't know it yet, but the woman they were calling wasn't the one they dismissed. She had the key now, both to the vault and to the table they'd once refused to let her sit at. The first time she saw them again, it wasn't in some grand planned reunion. It was on a raw November afternoon, the kind where the sky can't decide if it wants to rain or snow. Elaine had just stepped out of her study when she heard the sound of tires crunching along the gravel drive, the kind of slow approach that wasn't a delivery van. She moved to the front window, parting the heavy curtain just enough to see a black sedan idling under the bare oak trees. William stepped out first, his once tailored overcoat hanging loose on his frame. Charlotte followed, dressed in muted beige, the kind of outfit that tried to whisper tasteful, but couldn't hide the fray at the cuffs. They stood there a moment, as if the house itself made them nervous. When Elaine opened the door, the wind knifed through the gap, carrying the faint smell of wet leaves. "Elaine," Charlotte's voice was softer than she remembered. Not weak, just warm. "Can we come in?" She stepped aside without a word. The siblings took in the foyer, their eyes darting over the gleaming wood floors, the polished banisters, the chandelier restored to its full glittering weight. This was not the ruin they'd handed her. They sat at the dining table, oak polished to a mirror finish, hands folded tight. No jokes, no smirks. William cleared his throat. We things haven't been good. Vineyard gone, the penthouse sold. We have debts, real ones, Charlotte added. We didn't know where else to go. Her eyes flicked up to Elaine's, then back to her hands. From the kitchen, the faint hum of the kettle filled the silence. Elaine poured tea into 3 cups, sliding theirs across the table before taking her seat. She didn't rush to fill the space with comfort. Let the silence work. Let them feel what it was to wait. Finally, she spoke, her tone calm. When you gave me this house, you thought it was worthless. Neither of them looked up. I turned it into something more than you could imagine, and I did it without taking a thing from either of you. She let that sit, the weight of truth pressing in. Now you're here because you need me. Charlotte's voice broke just a little. We'll do whatever it takes. Elaine sipped her tea, watching them over the rim of the cup. You'll repay every cent. You'll work not just for me, but for something that matters. The foundation I built in our parents' name is expanding. You'll help run it, and you'll answer to me. William bristled faintly, the old pride twitching. But he didn't speak. It's not punishment, Elaine continued. It's perspective, the same kind I had to earn when you left me with nothing. From the corner of the room, the winter light shifted, painting long shadows across the table. Charlotte nodded first, slow and deliberate. William followed, his shoulders slumping as if sitting down a load he'd carried too long. When they left, the sedan's engine fading down the drive, Elaine stood at the library door. Her gaze traced the shelves, the hidden vault beyond, the heartbeat of everything that had made this moment possible. Word of their return spread through the village within a week. At the bakery, 2 locals leaned over the counter. They're working for her now. Sure looks that way. Life's funny like that. By spring, the 3 of them could be seen together at charity events, ribbon cutings, and fundraisers. But everyone knew whose name was on the checks, whose vision guided the room. And Elaine, she didn't need to gloat. The mansion stood as proof enough that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't in watching someone fall, but in making them rise, even if they have to do it under your roof. If you were in Elaine's place, would you forgive or make them pay? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because the next story will leave you speechless.